Hello, be very welcome to another immersion in the unknown corners of our existence. First of all, I would like to know where you accompany us from and what is the exact time there. Get ready, put your headphones and try not to submit to the dark force of fear. Since my brother David has been diagnosed with an irreversible condition, we have turned our Sunday lunches into a sacred ritual. It was a chance to pretend that everything was still as before, silencing agony and celebrating memories as if they could protect our gift. The food, laughter, and shared stories carried a glow that no one in the family dared to overshadow. But in the middle of every bite there was a secret. My brother had made me a request that I could not refuse, to help him from if the pain became unbearable. At first I thought it was something said in a moment of despair, a confession that anyone in their place could do. I looked away, pretended to be nothing, waiting for him to change his mind. But the weeks passed, and the subject came back, firmer than before, like a seed that refused to stop growing. David spoke bluntly without exaggerated drama. He wanted me to be the guardian of his last breath, ensuring that his end came serenely. Refusing it seemed the obvious, and I did it over and over. I tried to present remote hopes for a new treatment. Remember that doctors still had letters in the sleeve. But he just smiled, with that tiredness on his face, and repeated that I would never understand. And perhaps I really didn't understand. Every day the disease consumed him more, taking it out of everything he loved, starting with the little joys. Before, he loved to play with sauces and create new flavors in the kitchen. Now I could barely hold a fork. At first we cooked together on Sundays, choosing recipes and taking turns the steps. It was a genuine effort to deny the tragedy. But as his condition worsened, I took the stove as he watched, telling our mother stories, giving tips on the exact spice. There was a tone of farewell to these conversations, but few noticed. For the rest of the family, the disease was such a big shadow that they preferred not to name it. And so each one clung to the very way of dealing. Our mother, Yandira, believed in an imminent miracle. Our father, Rogerio, kept a heavy silence. And I found refuge in cooking. It was one of those lunches that David last insisted. He was no longer asking for my understanding, but demanding my participation. "You'll help me, don't you?" he asked bluntly. I was unanswered, but I felt that deep down I had already decided. The following meals became a countdown. In each dish I kept what would be the way to free it. For the rest of the family, those encounters still looked like pure comfort. For David and to me, they were steps towards the end that we had planned in silence. I was still trying to fool myself, thinking that he could give up, or that medicine would advance in a magic pass. But the pain only grew. David was no longer firm in handling the cutlery, and forced smiles that teared me. Day after day I tried to prepare dishes that evoked happy memories, but nothing more had the same flavor. The feeling of being on a stage repeating the act of a tragic piece chased me. On a specific Sunday, what he called the marked day arrived. He woke up strangely quiet, without the usual sigh of discomfort, and stared at me before lunch. I just said in a firm tone, "It's today." I felt a cold in my pimple, but I contained any reaction. I prepared his favorite meal, mixing ingredients and something more. Something calculated, carefully hidden in the texture. As the house was filled with the aroma of the food, everyone sat at the table. My father served, my mother asked trivialities, and David laughed at a comment from an aunt. Everything seemed so common, but it wasn't. The moment I put his plate in front of him, our eyes crossed. He knew and I knew. Fear was pulsate in my chest, but I kept the same feature as usual, chewed as if nothing happened, smiled when the conversation asked for a smile, and tried to give any illusion of normality. He returned, telling old stories, as if he thanked every final moment. And then, silently, the change was noted. His shoulders relaxed, his breath was getting weak, and he dropped the talk. The family still laughed at some memory my mother told. David stopped eating, focusing on each sound around. His gaze was distant, as if seeing something we couldn't see. In a soft breath, he lowered his head, and suddenly he was no longer there. My mother, without understanding, called him. My father rose in a jump. My aunt squeezed her hand against her mouth, not believing. Everything exploded in screams, crying, and despair. The ambulance was not long, but I already knew the outcome. The official explanation, he simply, if it was, without pain or warning. A sleepless sleep. For me, only the weight of a pact without witnesses was left. I kept the secrecy swallowed dry, certain that David had left in peace. Since then, the act of cooking has never been the same. No dish has color or taste that pleases me. In each meal, I see the moment when I served the last portion for someone he loved. Hey, you who are following but have not signed up, do not be on the sidelines. Subscribe now and enable notifications. Participate in our community and don't miss any video. For you who are already part of this family, thank you very much. Now let's go to the next case. When my 7-year-old daughter Esther was diagnosed with severe renal bankruptcy, I felt my world crumble. The doctors said she would need a transplant, and the whole family ran to do compatibility testing. What I didn't expect was to find out that, biologically, I wasn't her father. My first reaction was to think that there was some grotesque error in the exams, an exchange of names or confusion in the lab. I asked the doctor to check it all over again. She remained serious, checked the results, and confirmed there was no compatibility between me and Esther, nor the lowest probability. We left the office in silence. My wife, Diana, was tense in a way I didn't understand at the time. Esther slept in the back seat, completely oblivious to the severity of what was happening. When we arrived, I settled her on the bed. She was not yet old enough to understand the depth of the problem. My wife was waiting for me in the room. "Rodeo, Leslie," I asked if there was anything she wanted to tell me. She hesitated and denied, insisting that those exams made no sense, that she would never have betrayed me. But his voice trembled, showing the truth. The days that followed were a nightmare. Between comings and goings to the hospital, more incessant tests and connections, I fought against the reality that swallowed me. Esther needed an urgent transplant, but with each new result, the hope diminished. My mother, my in-laws, my brother from another city, everyone had unsuccessful tests. Until a doctor said he had finally found a compatible donor, the neighbor of the next house, Gabriel. He was a longtime friend, present in birthdays, barbecues, and weekends. I never suspected anything. But as soon as I learned of compatibility, something inside me froze. Diana remained by my side, avoiding staring at me. It was impossible not to suspect that there was something beyond coincidence. She continued to swear innocence, but biology does not lie. I let the anger guide myself and rolled up albums, old conversations, any track that pointed out a betrayal. At first there was nothing blunt, but then strange messages came up, called deleted, and a phrase that destroyed any pretense. "I miss you." Confronted, Diana still denied, but was cornered. He cried, shouted, said it was an old mistake, something that feared confessing. And now the truth was imposed. There was a great chance for Gabriel to be the biological father. Meanwhile, time ran against Esther, which needed the transplant. The neighbor agreed to donate without blinking, saying he would do everything for her. In the hospital, I wandered the corridors, not knowing where to position my feelings. My whole life looked like a castle of letters about to crumble. The surgery took hours, and every minute I was wondering how to deal with after everything was over. There I was, hoping that a man who probably generated my daughter would save her. Diana and I barely exchanged words. When the doctor appeared saying that everything had been doing well, I felt relief, mixed with an unnamed pain. I went to see Esther, still sedated, so fragile in the hospital bed. I touched his hand and whispered words of comfort, but my heart was in ruins. Shortly thereafter, Gabriel was taken to a room to recover. I crossed the corridor and saw it a hallmark, pale but conscious. Our looks met for a moment, a painful and unlimited encounter. He had just saved Esther's life, but at the same time tearing mine. Without saying anything, I walked away, not knowing if I hated him or should thank him. Esther survived, but my marriage didn't. The house, previously full of memories, became the scene of anguish. Diana and I separated without great fights, but without possibility of reconciliation. My daughter was still everything to me, regardless of any blood loop. I visited her on weekends and helped her with school tasks. She asked why I no longer slept at home, and we told vague stories to spare her from the truth. Months dragged, and I didn't do any additional DNA tests. I was afraid of what I would find. Would something change? I loved her before I knew about betrayal, and this love could not simply disappear. The neighbor continued to be part of her life, but there was no discussion or apology between us. Only the eternal embarrassment of two people who would never reconcile. Sometimes I took me reflecting, if the test proved definitively that Esther is not my daughter, would that change what I feel? No, but the damage was done, and every night I tried to understand how to proceed. Time has passed, but the answer to this question never came and may not come. I never doubted my sister and I were twins. Called Ava, she was my constant company. We grew up wearing the same clothes, sharing toys and completing the sentences of each other. Despite small differences, I a little higher, she with a spot near her eye, no one has ever questioned our relationship. The idea of an ancestry test came unpretentiously. We were messing with our parents' old albums when Eva suggested, laughing, that it would be fun to discover our origins. We bought those kits, spit on the tubes and sent it by mail. No one expected any mystery. It would be just a funny curiosity. They took weeks to get the results. The email finally came and opened the report on the site. Everything seemed normal except for a terrible detail. The system did not recognize Ava as my close relative. Instead of a twin, it didn't even appear as a sister. It was as if we were only known distant. She called me, the voice in shock. I entered the crash thinking of laboratory failures, confusion when labeling our samples. We went to our parents' house, Lucas and Elvira, with printed results. Daddy looked away. Mom took too long to say anything. We press. Then she sighed and admitted that many years ago she had a suspicion. When Eva and I was born, there was some confusion in the hospital. Mom noticed something strange, asked the nurses, but said everything was right. Over time, she choked the doubt, fearful to face the truth and lose her daughter's loved. We were paralyzed when he heard her. Did we not even be the same family? We did a new test, including our parents, and the result was unquestionable. None of us had blood ties. The feeling of being torn from his own identity was devastating. I looked at Ava, my lifetime sister, not knowing what we were after all. We departed in search of biological families, rolling papers, medical records, and everything that could clarify that nightmare. Soon came the second blow. My real mother had died a few months earlier. I would never really know her. And when we tried to talk to her family, we were greeted as intruders. A man who would be my uncle appeared at the door and before we talked ordered us to be away. There was no place for us there. Shortly thereafter, we discovered the existence of another girl, the one that should have been raised in my place in my house. That's when everything took dark contours. This girl, the true daughter of our parents of creation, had nothing of love and care I received. She, who was called Roberta, had been created in a stormy home, full of violence and endless nights of fear. When we meet, I felt my heart tighten. She had features a little similar to mine, but the look contained a hardness that I didn't recognize. We sat in a cafe to talk, and she fired, "So you were the children who had the life that should have been mine?" I didn't know what to answer. Roberta told how she lived running, trying not to hear the shouts of the drunk stepfather or feel the disregard of her passive mother. My mind, before certain, flooded questions. Would there be an accidental exchange, or someone, for mercy or for unknown reason, decided to change us intentionally? I asked aloud. But Roberta just laughed without humor, saying that her mother insinuated something about her being different from time to time, but nothing conclusive. After meeting her, I didn't sleep well for weeks. I searched files and reports on maternity errors, but nothing specific emerged. It was like chasing shadows. Our parents insisted to put it aside. My foster mother blamed the fate. Dad closed her face. Eva and I were raised in a home of affection, while Roberta experienced the cruelest face of a fragmented family. If the exchange occurred by accident, I was saved by a carelessness. If it was planned, then someone wanted to get us out of what could have been hell. None of this erased the blame. I was debt with Roberta, but there was no compensating for all those years she lived without affection. To this day, I have no answers. Some secrets seem to enjoy staying in the dim light, out of any explanation. I just know that Eve and I continue together, even without being blood sisters, and Roberta follows her way. As for what happened in that maternity, it is error or deliberate plan. It rests in a silence that no one was able to break.